Welcome to another episode of EC30. The conversation continues on racism and the gospel. Season two's theme is on earth as it is in heaven. Remember, we don't have to wait until we stand before a holy God to celebrate diversity, learn from one another, worship together, cheer loudly for one another. We can do that here and now as Jesus prayed on earth as it is in heaven. We want to practice those things now. Our special guest today, we're so honored to have uh, the Honorable Judge Agnes Chappell with us. She is not only a judge in Jefferson County, she began and was the first African American female to practice law in Jefferson County almost 40 years ago. She presently serves as a circuit judge in the Domestic Relations Division of Jefferson County. She's also been on the Municipal Court, City of Birmingham, worked in domestic violence court. She has vast experiences. She's received the Metro Birmingham NCAA Equal Justice Award back in 2009. She's received multiple awards. Some of the best things is she is a member of the New Rising Star Missionary Baptist Church, where her son, Reverend Thomas Beavers, is the pastor, and her father, Reverend Dr. Thomas Chappell, is the pastor emeritus, and that he was there when they were just 50 or so people. She has two adult children. She brings such a wisdom and insight, both operating in the court system and encouraging people along the way, talking about disproportion and things that have affected one ethnicity over the other. Uh, just such great insight. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Again, my name is David Graves as your host. I'll say a quick prayer. This is meant to be conversational, so you'll hear us just discuss ideas. It is to give you examples of having conversations about racism in the gospel, um, about ways people have been marginalized, how we can advocate, how we can be involved to continue to press into these issues. Let's pray together. God, thank you for this day. We recognize that this day has passed through your hand, and we trust you. We love you. We ask your spirit to shine light in dark places, to reveal the biasness in our hearts, the natural biases that we have. Lord, also ways that we will only tend to view things. Help us to be stretched, to learn from one another, to receive instruction, to implement change. We pray this for the sake of your beautiful name and for your glory. Enjoy this episode with the Honorable Judge, Agnes Chappell. Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of EC30. The conversation continues on racism and the gospel. Season two's theme is on earth as it is in heaven. We don't have to wait and celebrate diversity and encourage one another. When we get to before a holy God, worshiping him, we can do that here and now. And today's special guest, I'm so excited. We have the Honorable Judge Agnes Chappell with us from here in Jefferson County. Judge, how you doing today?
I'm doing just great. How are you?
I am doing well. We're so honored because as we talk about racism and the gospel, we've presented so many ideas to individuals here, everything from pastors in the pulpit, authors, speakers. And I wanted to have somebody come on and talk to us about criminal justice, not so much criminal justice reform, but perspective of how the courts work, things that they do to encourage the family unit. Judge Chappell was actually the first African American female to practice law in Jefferson County. How many years ago was that, Judge?
Oh, let's see. I almost can't remember, but at
About
least
20
40
years.
years ago, that was
Wow.
1977 to be exact.
And why don't you take a little time and just share with us what it was like to to be the first one to practice law uh, in Jefferson County, what it looked like then, what maybe things needed to change, how you progressed, and how you affected change even as you began to practice law 40 years ago in Jefferson County.
Oh wow, that's a monumental task right there just to reflect back on those days.
Yes, ma'am.
But I do want to share with you that I'm not an expert in criminal justice,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
I know a lot about the legal justice system, the
Yes, ma'am.
court system as a
Mhm.
whole, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
But anyway, let's see. I knew it was something strange when I was in law school my last year. And I saw the white men who had this long hair and a lot of facial hair began to cut off their hair, get rid of those ponytails, get rid of that facial hair. And occasionally I would see them with a tie and a white shirt on. And I'm like, hmm, you really look different today. And then they would say something to me like, oh, yeah, I had a job interview. And they would spout off the name of this big, huge law firm.
Mhm.
And I'm like to myself, I didn't get any invitations like that to join a big, huge law firm or to become a member of the legal staff at some Fortune 500 company. My only choices when I got out of law school was to start my own private practice so that I could practice on people.
Mm.
Or I did get the opportunity to work with the Legal Services Corporation here in town who represented people who were at poverty level or below.
Mm.
And so those were my options. And actually, it ended up that working at Legal Services was very good for me. I did a lot of consumer law, finding out basically that poor people or consumers in general, to be exact, did not have the protection that we needed to be as productive as we could be in this world. That the lack of consumer law that leaned towards people sort of gave us many setbacks. And also, I did a lot of landlord tenant law to find out basically that there was really uh, no protection from those landlords who were not interested in making the property livable,
Mm.
but they just had something standing up there that was called a house
Right.
and expected people to pay for that. And it was
Right.
still raining in the house and that kind of thing. So that was my beginning.
Mm.
And then I went into private practice, only to learn that my friends, my family were very selective in the types of cases that they would give to me to represent them on. They realized something that maybe I had never thought about before, because I was fairly young when I started practicing law. I was like 21 years old.
I was gonna say
And
about if I was gonna say maybe 10 or 12 if you saying it was 40 years ago, Judge.
yeah, that was a long time ago. But anyway, they knew that it was a good old boy system. And so they would only give me like, do my will, uh, do this lease for me, or that kind of thing. But when
Right.
it was like a medical malpractice or a personal injury case, no, I got to take this case somewhere else.
Mhm.
And I sort of later understood what was going on there because the dynamics were real. I mean, it was at a point where when I would go to court, I would see all of the white male lawyers standing around and sitting in the judge's chambers, having cups of coffee and enjoying small talk and full of laughter.
Mhm.
And I went straight to the courtroom and waited for my case to be called. So, I'm not really saying that many deals were cut in that chambers, but it certainly looked like it.
Right.
And then I went to work at family court, where I think I was most beneficial and most helpful in terms of keeping families together, finding resources for families, and that kind of thing.
So as those who've listened to the podcast season 1 and season 2, they're hearing a lot of common themes, not having opportunity as other people had opportunity, even when it became a little bit of diversity. And hey, we want to champion the fact that you were able to practice law as a pioneer. I mean this in all respect and an extreme compliment. We are talking to living history today, in that we have somebody who broke through a barrier in Jefferson County, the first African American female to practice law in Jefferson County. This is tremendous. I am so humbled and excited that we're talking about it. But the listeners, they've heard a little bit of, now we're having diversity breakthrough, but not so much inclusion, which is the power sharing. Even as she mentioned, friends and family would give her certain cases, maybe not the big cases, because that good old boy network at the time. Now we're going to make the transition here. You mentioned family court. That is currently where you're seated as a circuit judge. And I'd just like you to share with our audience, whether they're listening on the podcast or watching on YouTube, talk about your passion for family court and how you help try and reestablish the family unit in what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Now, I must also say this to you, and I probably should have told you this earlier because a lot of people confuse the two because of the names. They are misnomers. We have the Jefferson County Family Court, where I indeed served for some 19 years. And then we have the Domestic Relations Court.
Yes, ma'am.
Where we do grant divorces.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm hired to do.
Mm.
But when I was at family court, when I first went there, it was hard for the people who already worked there, and it was hard for me because of the kinds of cases and the timing of it all. It was during a time when people didn't have a lot of jobs. The economy was bad. And what we had to do things like collect child support and enforce the child support orders, enter child support orders and enforce them. And I noticed that the child support amounts were like $15 a week. And even in 1983 and 84, $15 a week, no child could be maintained off of $15 a week. Mm. And that would have been maybe a little all right with me, but I knew that this child did not stand a chance if the child was not financially provided for. So I probably became the ogre because I'm like, we're going to learn responsibility and we're going to get involved with our children. Mm. And so things have evolved tremendously since that time. I think people now know that they have to support their families financially. And we have more parents, non-custodial parents, who are involved with their children than I saw when I first went to family court. Family court was basically for families where children were born out of wedlock when it came to paternity issues. You know, those children who were born out of wedlock were called bastards. Mm-hmm. And it was mainly because, to me it sort of denoted that those children were not important. That's how I perceived that, as the children were not important. In fact, I had a person just the other day tell me, he pays child support for a child who was born out of wedlock, but he's not taking care of this child who was born in a marriage. Well, I've learned on the bench that some things that you just don't address at that moment. So I just let it roll just like it was rolling. But there are people who still think that one child is better than another child. Bring it on home. One human being is better than another human being.
Can I,
And
before
that's
you,
simply not the case. So
and that touches on something that I was having a conversation today about dehumanizing language. We were talking about COVID being referred to by politicians in a phrase, and I'm going to use the phrase in no disrespect, but they were calling it the Kung flu, right? Almost as not maybe not as a joke, but as a quip or to kind of be a catchphrase. And what they didn't realize, or maybe they did realize, those type of jokes that are words that are dehumanizing cause people to create a bias against a community as a whole, an Asian community, as we've seen a rise in Asian violence or incidents of bias or racism against the Asian community. So even using the term bastard, as you brought it home, of saying one child is more important than another child, words matter. Words matter. So
definitely.
please continue your observations in either one of the courtrooms that you served. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so then at some point, we all woke up and the legislature woke up and they realized that we could no longer use the term bastard. And so we had to do a lot of advocating back during that time for causes that affect children back during that time. I remember that we did paternity and child support cases, but I also did delinquency cases. And back during that time, children, uh, well, even now, if you take a child to family court and they are placed in a place, well, you can call it children's jail, but we called it detention. And they don't get a bond. They don't get to bond out, or no bail is set for them. So it's left up to the judge who is hearing that case, or the referee. In that instance, I was a referee hearing the case, to decide whether the child will stay in the holding, well, I'll just say for the audience, children's jail, or whether they get to go home with their parents. And then just think about it now. In some neighborhoods, a child may commit an act that seems criminal or could be criminal, and they are taken to their parents and say, little Johnny did this. But in the inner city, those children aren't taken to their parents. They are brought directly to the family court to go into the detention facility, which we can call the children's jail. And then we have to decide whether to let them out. And one of the big things that played a part as to whether these children were allowed to leave the children's jail and go home was what kind of home they were going to. Were they going to a home that had two parents? That was big deal, two parents. And we know that two parents would be better than having one parent. But that doesn't mean that because they have one parent, that one parent, being a human being and knowing how to nurture their child, the child shouldn't be treated differently because they're from a one parent home. So to me, that's another thing we have to be really careful about. Yes, we know the Bible speaks of two parents, but I tell all the parents, if you don't have two parents, if there are not two parents there, you better parent, even if you're one parent. And what is important is that somebody parents that child. But now in other neighborhoods, they had two parents. So you see how even just something as small as that can impact and keep more people of one race in jail than others because of just the very dynamics of their home life.
So, and that's I'll reference a documentary I saw before. It talked about when they were cracking down on drug use, right? The difference between powder cocaine and crack cocaine. It was sentenced differently, treated differently, and so it disproportionately affected one community, African-American community, versus the guys on Wall Street who were doing cocaine, but then in the inner city, crack cocaine, mandatory sentencing, those type of things. So now we come back to what you said about family court. Uh, Two children, one may live in the suburbs of Birmingham, do something, uh, breaking. I'm just going to use an example: break into a house. Whoever the officer is makes a decision. Hey, want to let the parents handle this. Take him home. This is what he did. We're not. And we're using very broad strokes in storytelling here. You know, this happened. You guys need to take care of it, make restitution, whatever. Happens in the inner city, that maybe a different officer makes a decision of, hey, this breaks the law. We're going to follow the book here. We're going by the book. One officer, maybe in the suburbs, says, hey, I've got discretion. I'm going to choose this. The inner city cop says, or police officer says, we're going by the law, takes them before the court. Now a child, as you can see, two different scenarios. One child is already having the weight of the system more heavily applied to them. Now they go into, as you called it, children's jail. And part of the criteria to look at is, okay, now let's look at the family. Let's look at the parents. Okay, we may not have looked at the parents in the suburbs. We made a general assumption to the best. And for the inner city child, we made a general assumption more so to the worst side. And so all these things stacked against that inner city child to where disproportionately they have spent time, uh, whether it be children's jail or whatever. So, okay, so now we've talked about the decision you have to make as a judge of examining the home. Somebody has to parent this child, whether it's one or two. How do you, dealing in that setting, continue to keep in the forefront of your mind both the law and trying to encourage that family unit, however it looks like, to strengthen the community?
Well, I think it helps having a judge on the bench who sort of understands or try to learn about the dynamics of various cultures and
Mm,
various communities. We cannot afford to be one dimensional. Uh, and I think that diversity on the bench is good for that reason, plus many more. It's because we as judges talk to each other. So we get to educate each other as to, I mean, some things that we do that turns out having a racist effect is not something that we planned from the very beginning. It's like when you talk about sentencing for drugs. I don't think the intention was necessarily to put more Black people in jail than any other group of people.
mhm.
I think that it worked out that way because nobody really thought about, well, what's this choice of drug? What's this choice of drug? What makes one worse than the other? Nobody really dealt with those particular issues. I mean, even as a Black person, I don't know if I at that point would have realized, but at some point I would have said, hey, wait a minute. We're locking up too many people of one particular race as opposed to the other. And it's like, for instance, I also worked at municipal court, and we do a lot of things in terms of trying to rehabilitate people, help people, move them along in society, which is something very good to do, because I think when I first got out of law school, the whole criminal system was about retribution and retribution alone. But sometimes, even when we are trying to help, we are hurting. I have seen people, we have like a drug court in the city of Birmingham. I've seen people stay in that court for a long time over some marijuana.
Mm.
But we created the court to help people. We didn't create it to be a burden on people. For instance, also people can't pay their fines. So we created like community service. But how convenient or how hard is it? Or are we putting people into hey, is this another form of slavery where we just, okay, well, I'm gonna give you one sheet of paper, you complete all the community service and check that off on this sheet, knowing I got 300 hours to do. So why I got to keep coming back up there, bringing you a sheet of paper when you can't give me enough paper that I can do all my community service. So even with systems, this is where I see systemic racism. I see racism more now in terms of attitudinal and systemic in terms of our thought processes, the procedures, the processes that we use, as opposed, I don't know if we got a law on the book, and I mean, we may still have some old, we still got some old laws on the book that we can't enforce anymore, thank God. But in 2021, it's not always the laws per se. It may be the regulations. It may be the me sitting up there ruling on somebody's case, but not understanding the full dynamics or the full picture of the case. Those kind of things hurt, and hurt a lot in terms of shaping families, shaping people, and understanding that we're all human beings, and we are all do-gooders.
Well, and when you mentioned we as judges, not you and I as judges, but when you were saying we as judges talk to each other, we educate one another. One of the benefits, even to a citizen, as we consider racism and systematic racism, the sooner we can make the confession and a true belief, there's so many things I don't know, and there are people who can educate me in this area. Help me understand is such a powerful phrase. As you mentioned, a form of slavery for somebody doing community service to have to bring back a sheet over and over again, whereas they could be out doing the community service versus the hour down to the court, waiting their turn to do that, turning it in, getting it processed. Now they got to go back. They wasted 2 hours that could have gone toward community service. Even those type of things, as we look at any system that's in place, if we will have the confession in the front of our hearts and our minds and say, there are perspectives and things that I will never experience, that I don't understand, but there are people out there, if I'm willing to learn and listen and humble myself, who can help move us along. I like how you use the phrase that we are trying to help move people along in society. We as believers, you hear a lot of people talking about being pro-life, and what they're really saying is they're against abortion. But pro-life means we are going to cheer loudly for that guy who is on his third marijuana case. We are going to cheer loudly for that guy who is coming out of child support, who's struggling to get a job because of a prior conviction and those type of things. So we're just not pro-life from womb, but we're pro-life womb to tomb, in that everybody's redeemable. And
Yes.
in that, we can't celebrate Imago Day and then be selective about who we say can be redeemed. This ethnicity, this financial class, this person who has opportunity, this person who has not had opportunity. Imago Day means every person has the opportunity to be redeemed. Every person. So, all right,
Exactly.
Judge, as we now we want to move in kind of to start to wrap up. I'm going to have you switch the judge robe, and as a citizen, speak to ways that we can continue to support our community as well as impact those policies and procedures. Like you said, hey, we may not know in real time that this policy or this regulation is disproportionately affecting one particular race. But when we realize that, we as citizens, what can we do to affect change to impact future generations?
Okay, in terms of laws that end up being oppressive, then we should know our legislators, and we should talk to them, uh, find proposals to give to them of laws that can be passed, uh, hold our legislators accountable. We should really know the issues. I mean, there are people who really think that people want a handout. I'm gonna tell you, handouts hurt. They don't help. They will. I tell people who come before me all the time, nobody is gonna really give you what you're worth. You're gonna have to push it and move it and embrace yourself and all of your skills and know your weaknesses and your strengths and work on those and use those to get where you need to be. And when we just only give, we're supposed to give handouts for immediate needs, but we need to help teach people to fish. And we need not be judgmental. We are so judgmental. People judge me, like coming in the courtroom. They look at me and they decide, I don't know if she knows what she's doing. Even as a professional, you still gonna find some biases. I have my own biases, which but you need to know what they are. You need to identify your own biases and you need to work on getting rid of them. We just want people, everybody, I think that most people just want to be treated as a human being and given a chance. And government should be there to support. We need to learn not to lean on, but we need their support. We need the environment, the infrastructure where people can have good jobs, where people can have enough money to pay their bills and then have enough for recreation, enough to even take a pinch of it and give it back or give it to somebody else, pay it forward. So we also have to be so careful about our systems because we don't want the systems to be of such that we limit our talents and our abilities and our desires. We want systems that will perpetuate and cause all of us to realize life, liberty, and happiness.
And when you mention that a handout can hurt long term, not a story, shared it sometimes with friends before. There was a period of time growing up in South Alabama, our family went on welfare. My father was feeding a family of six, only one working, and then our two cousins had to move in with us because of a family tragedy that happened. I still remember seeing that lunch discount card that I had and that I went and walked through the line. And the first time I did it, I felt ashamed that I was receiving help. And so graciously, my father, uh, oftentimes a hard disciplinarian, but there were these times he was so tremendous and compassionate to say, hey, listen, there are times that you need help and you don't need to be too proud to ask for help or receive help, but you're not going to stay here because this is a short season. We shopped on the generic aisle in Del Shamps, Thomasville, Alabama, where puffed wheat was in a clear plastic bag with black print on it, just said puff wheat. So I want to keep in the forefront of my mind a great sense of empathy of times when I've needed somebody to come along and say, I'm here for you, and not disassociate my times of need to somebody else's times of need. Equal importance, Imago Dei, the image of God, how we want to make sure that, as you said, long term handouts help will decrease someone's value, and we want them to rise up in the community. Oh, Judge, you're such a blessing to us. The one thing I'll say to people too, as she mentioned, know the laws, know policies, regulations. Uh, right now, be sure that you're looking at what's happening with voter reform around the country. There are things taking place in other states. If they pass in other states, they're likely to pass here. And remember, we want to be sensitive and aware of things that could disproportionately affect one ethnicity over the other. Everything from absentee voting to regulations. The one in the Georgia House right now has a stipulation in it saying it would become a misdemeanor to either provide water or food to somebody standing in line who is there to vote. And I'll tell you ahead of time, if that law passes, because it violates the laws of God, I will gladly receive that misdemeanor if it means helping a brother and sister in need. So, as we wrap up today, let me bring us full circle here with the judge. She not only is a judge, was the first African American to practice, female to practice law in Jefferson County. She's also a member of New Rising Star Church, where her son is the pastor. Reverend Thomas Beavers is the pastor, and her father started New Rising Star. Am I correct?
Well, he didn't start it, but there were
Okay.
like 50 members there when he got there. So it grew with the help of God
Man,
from 50 to many, many more.
and Thomas, Pastor Beavis was our very first guest on the podcast. He laid the groundwork for the trajectory of us taking, and now to be able to bring the experience and the lens and the wisdom of his mom, who is a judge, who reminds us that everybody has equal worth. We want to treat them with dignity. We want to provide them with opportunities, encourage them to move along in society where they have the opportunity to live open handed, helping other people. We do this all by the grace of God. Judge, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insight. We are better believers and we are better citizens having this time with you.
Well, thank you for having me.